There's no mistakes in this miracle. We never know what people are going through beyond the surface. We often don't even know what we are going through beneath the surface. So it's important that we don't just look at what's happening on the surface, because that is only a clue about so much more of what's actually happening inside of us. There are no mistakes in the miracle of your being. It's not possible. Every part of you is exactly how every part of you is, for a specific reason. And the reason comes back to love. And every part of consciousness is worthy of unconditional love. The key here is loving liberation. It's not The following known bonus feature addresses the sensitive topic of hypersexualized tendencies in relation to traumatic stress, including suppressed traumas or early childhood traumas. Please only continue watching this video if you believe this information may be of assistance to you or a loved one along your healing journey through life. If this topic feels inappropriate or triggering in any capacity, I lovingly advise you to continue and click to the next video. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being you. Early childhood trauma or adverse childhood experiences may provoke divergent neurodevelopment that results in unique order of wiring within the neurobiological social engagement system, which is something that I refer to as a unique order, rather than a disorder. It's a miraculous evolutionary adaptation of our neurobiological structures where all the different components learn to function autonomously from one another or independently from one another for optimal survival and thrival. The entire occurrence of this process transpires unconsciously, meaning that the brain and the body never intentionally decide to develop that way, and consciousness, or the miraculous self-essence of who we truly are, never chooses that style of automated personal experience. I discuss this in more detailed depth in Theses Statements 7 through 10, so please feel free to explore that for more information. Presently in the world, this is described as structural dissociation. When uniqueorders develop from any type of sexual trauma, especially when occurring during early stages of neurodevelopment in the first 10-20 years of life, there may be states of consciousness who experience unique styles of hypersexualized tendencies. This may manifest through automated styles of internal sensations, action patterns that affect decision making, and automated styles of brain-body regulation, affecting anything and everything from brain waves and brain hemispheric connectivity to hormones, neurotransmitters, and activity throughout the nervous systems. I believe this is a profoundly important topic to explore. These states of consciousness often develop to protect other states of consciousness who are within the traumatic memories of the sexual trauma. So I want to explore this a little bit to provide some insight so that we can have more compassion and respect for aspects of consciousness who are within these experiences. Because consciousness and neurobiology are not the same thing. Neurobiology is not personally experiencing itself. Consciousness is the self within the experience. Okay? But the automated style of experience stems from the neurobiological structures that are housing the divinity of consciousness. The hypersexualized tendencies and all the different features of experience they automatically and unconsciously impact stem from the neurobiological wiring, or the way the brain and the body are automatically operating based on past experiences that have stored data in here, long story short. Consciousness, though, is the self within experience. So no matter what is being experienced, consciousness is worthy of loving presence. And the more we can understand hypersexualized tendencies, especially stemming from early childhood sexual trauma, the more we can create respectful, compassionate space for these aspects of consciousness to provide loving liberation so consciousness can be its full, true self without feeling limited or reduced by any automated styles of personal experience. Consciousness simply wants to be free to be its true self. Well, this is an infinitely vast topic with an infinite amount of potentials to it, depending on individuals' trauma history. I'd like to just kind of look at one particular avenue and help shed light on this in any way I can, based on the case study work I've been exploring the past few years. Through my work, I discovered that approximately 99.08% of our inner beings exist and operate beyond direct perception and immediate awareness. So while hypersexualized tendencies might be the noticeable manifestation that we can first-handedly perceive and witness and pay attention to, there is so much more happening behind the scenes that are contributing to those automated styles of personal experience. So it's important that we don't just look at what's happening on the surface, because that is only a clue about so much more of what's actually happening inside of us. Okay, so let's look at one example. There's a young child, and she experiences a sexual trauma during early stages of neurodevelopment. Maybe she's 4, 5, 6 years old, and there's a severe sexual trauma, such as molestation. That occurs, and then life goes on. And the brain and the body continue developing. And because it happened at such a young age, the particulars became suppressed through implicit memory fragments. So the individual was not consciously aware of that event as life continued. Then the brain and the body around middle school age started to reach a space of maturation where sexual impulses began occurring within the unconscious body. The process of reaching this stage of puberty, or progressing during original stages of neurodevelopment, created unconscious ignitions of the suppressed childhood trauma stored as implicit memory fragments. Then the unconscious body-mind was reliving aspects of the original sexual trauma, but the self within experience had absolutely no idea about any of this. There might be some uncomfortable or painful bodily sensations, or maybe insomnia where the body's having a hard time exploring a rest state. There might be these subtle clues, but the conscious self does not know what's occurring in the unconscious body-mind because it is occurring so deeply within the unconsciousness. Okay, so if 99.08% of what's happening inside of us is not directly perceivable, then the 0.2% might be, I feel something funny in my body, or I feel a sense of anxiety, or I feel like I can't fully rest, or every time I try to fall asleep, I have these really weird dreams and nightmares and I wake up sweaty and panicky and I've thrown my pillows around because something scary was happening. That is only a minuscule fraction of what's actually occurring in the unconscious body-mind. There's these implicit memory fragments from the original sexual trauma being unconsciously activated because of how the body has reached a state of sexual maturation and all these things are occurring, and that ignites associated intel stored in the body. And then the unconscious body is reliving sensations of the original experience, but it was never processed, so they're fragments of sensations. Fragments of sensations. And then the activation of those suppressed implicit memory fragments are causing different styles of dysregulation in the body. And aspects of consciousness beyond direct perception and immediate awareness are directly in those experiences. Aspects of consciousness are trapped in the implicit memory fragments, reliving the original sexual trauma every time it's activated, which might be every moment of every day. It might be every time you fall asleep. It might be every time you eat food. Every time the original trauma memories are unconsciously activated, these aspects of consciousness who are trapped within that element of the neurobiological structures are reliving those sensations. Okay? But the conscious self has no idea about any of this. So how can you be there for that aspect of you when you don't even know that it's happening? In this example, even though there was one sexual trauma many years ago, as those memory fragments are unconsciously activated, the unconscious body-mind is reliving that experience. So even though externally there was one trauma at this one period of life, while the brain and the body continued developing, it is actually experiencing more traumas because that trauma is being relived. But this reality may not be apparent because trauma is not occurring externally. So it doesn't seem like there's anything happening. But deep within the unconsciousness, that trauma is being compounded. Every time it's activated, the neural data grows. So according to the unconscious body-mind, the data is not of one experience of being molested. Instead, the data inside the brain and the body is that that experience has happened hundreds of times. If you're, for example, at age 12 and that experience has been activated every single day for the past several years, every time that data is unconsciously activated and projected, it grows. So basically, the original experience created energetic data inside of the brain and the body, and it's multiplying itself. basically. So the implicit memory pieces, or the different fragments of sensations, etc., affiliated with neural wiring or the energetic intel within memories in the brain-body system from that experience, are being multiplied. They're being copied, basically. And then there's more of them. It's growing. The information is growing in the brain and the body. So according to the unconscious body-mind, what has happened is a sexual trauma that's occurred hundreds of times because of how hidden realities of the unconscious body-mind are unfolding. It's having its own unique personal experience. Most of what's happening in our personal experience, we don't actually directly know about. And so even though externally there was not chronic occurrences of trauma, the unconscious body-mind is experiencing energetic information as if that were the case. And this, again, is just one of infinite potentials and examples, but it's helpful to understand how implicit memories work and how neural data can unconsciously grow. So if there's one traumatic event that's suppressed, but being unconsciously activated and growing in the backdrop of neurobiological structures, then the conscious self might have zero awareness of any trauma, while the unconscious body-mind is in the most profound state of traumatic stress imaginable. And that is going to impact personal experience in immediate and future moments in expansively profound ways that the conscious self might have no understanding of. Okay, so then the unconscious body-mind gets super clever. It gets super clever, and it dares to evolve in a very miraculous way to help its own self in the most profound capacity imaginable. How clever is it of the unconscious body-mind to create a unique state of consciousness or a unique state of neurobiological engagement that stimulates certain styles of experiences for parts of consciousness, that experiences pain as pleasure. If there are aspects of our consciousness reliving that sexual trauma from early childhood, then how clever is it of the unconscious body-mind to develop a state of being where that becomes pleasurable? Okay? Miraculous evolutionary adaptation. Because if that's occurring all the time, every night or every day or every nanosecond or every other hour, whatever it might be, but it's happening unconsciously, remember, we don't know about this. The conscious self doesn't know about this, but it's happening. Okay, it's happening. And this child might be, 10, 11, 12, during the early stages of puberty. They haven't explored their neurobiological applications of consciousness. They're 12, you know what I mean? Like, children are simply within their experience, and they have nothing else to compare it to. So how do you know if something's off or something's different or something's wrong or etc. when that's simply what life is, So if this is occurring, and there's these aspects of consciousness of our inner child who are experiencing these horrific projections of neural intel from the original sexual trauma during early childhood, and then the unconscious body-mind a few years later is in stages of puberty, and all that's continually being activated and unconsciously relived. And how clever is it of the unconscious body-mind to develop a state of being where that pain becomes pleasure. And this may spark the ignition of a state of consciousness who then experiences hypersexualized tendencies. But the tendencies are only a surface clue of what's actually occurring deeper within the neurobiological structures. Within this example, let's look at the particulars about how the hypersexualized state of consciousness develops, because the hypersexualized tendencies manifest after, later, subsequently, after the fact, consequentially, after all this other activity occurs. But this subconscious activity or unconscious unfoldings within the unconscious body-mind often remain hidden. They're usually not directly perceivable. There may be some subtle clues like funny feelings in dreams or something, but the direct activity that occurs that precedes the hypersexualized tendencies is so unconscious and occurring beyond awareness that it's usually not something that the conscious mind can directly perceive or be aware of during or after the fact. Usually we're just aware of what's on the surface, but there's always more happening. Within my theories, I explain that 99% of everything happening within us occurs beyond direct perception and immediate awareness. So let's explore what's actually happening that precedes the hypersexualized tendencies within this example. As the body gradually reaches stages of puberty and sexual maturation, there's this unconscious activity where memory fragments from the original sexual trauma are being activated and projected into subconscious realities. Referencing my 20-second thesis statement, this activity occurs within the third subconscious layer. The projections are occurring because of activity in the unconscious body, and those projections are first-handedly being experienced by parts of consciousness within the third subconscious layer, meaning that it's very far away from the conscious mind. The unconscious body is going through it, but the conscious mind doesn't know about this activity directly. As this occurs, the neurobiological development gradually sculpts a state of being that can experience those painful projections as pleasure. This occurs within the second subconscious layer, the protectors of personal identity. What's occurring here is a shift in the subconscious interpretations of activity in the unconscious body. So the unconscious body is still going through the exact same stuff. There's states of sexual arousal as the body reaches these stages of puberty, and naturally there's all these shifts and hormones are shifting and stuff's growing and expanding, and there's all kinds of complex processes happening here at the early stages of puberty. And as all of that is occurring, the suppressed memory fragments from the original trauma are being activated. So that is still occurring in the unconscious body. The unconscious body is going through the exact same stuff beyond awareness. What's happening here is a miraculous evolutionary adaptation regarding how the subconscious realms interpret this unconscious activity. Rather than the third subconscious layer experiencing horrific, unbearable, indescribably traumatic projections from this occurrence, the second subconscious layer begins to automatically, unconsciously, instinctively, beyond awareness and choice and lucid decision making. To be clear, this is all happening in the operations of the unconscious body mind. It's all taking place down there, okay? Just in different elements of the unconscious body mind. But all of these processes are happening automatically, instinctively, and beyond awareness and conscious choice. The second subconscious layer gradually develops a state of being that experiences that sexual activity as pleasure. So the unconscious body going through the same stuff. The third subconscious realm is still going through the same stuff. But then the second subconscious realm shifts its activity to protect self-essence. And then when this activity occurs, the unconscious body is going through this unique neurobiological activity, and because of the different states of maturation during early puberty, the memory fragments in the original trauma are being activated and projected into experience, and then the third subconscious region holding parts of consciousness are first-handedly experiencing that activity. Then the second subconscious realm starts to experience that activity as a positive reality. So all of it's still occurring, but then there's a shift in the paradigm and the automated perceptual experience thanks to the protectors of self-essence or self-sense, which is a term that I use to describe personal identity. And you can find out more details about that and a lot of these concepts about the different subconscious layers in my book, Liberated Consciousness. All of this is occurring so unconsciously though, the second and third subconscious layer and the unconscious body. And so then there's the first subconscious layer and the conscious mind, and that's where stuff might be directly perceivable. Okay, so it's important to understand kind of how all of this works and flows, because we are only aware of a minuscule fraction of what's happening. Let's look at a couple examples of how this process might manifest and what's noticeable versus what's actually happening here. Let's say, for example, that this individual wakes up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat. There's scratches on their face from their own fingernails. The room is torn about. The covers and the blankets have been thrown to the other side of the room. And there's a deep sense of panic. The body is sweating, the heart's racing, there's a whole bunch of anxiety, and you're waking up in the middle of the night, right? So clearly the night's sleep got disrupted by something. In that moment, this individual might just be aware of this, what you see. The sweat dripping, the racing heart, the fact that there are scratches on the face, but you don't know why or what happened. The fact that pillows and blankets are on the other side of the room, but you don't really know why or why they're there. The conscious mind is only aware of that. Okay, that's all that is known in this example. Okay, that's all that's known in this example. But that's just what's happening in the conscious mind. So what's happening deeper? Okay, what's happening deeper? While the body was asleep, certain states of unconscious activity activated the implicit memory fragments from the original trauma and projected them into reality. Okay, the body and the brain keep doing all of their stuff while we're sleeping. Like, we might think we're resting, but that's just because the conscious mind is taking a snooze. The unconscious body, brain, and all of this stuff here, it's still doing all of its stuff, okay? It's still doing all of its things, all of its things, all of its things. We just don't know about it because we're asleep. But lots of things are happening while we're asleep, and there are parts of our consciousness who are directly in those experiences beyond our awareness. It's helpful to keep this in mind along any type of healing journey through life. While the body was sleeping, there's this activity. Then there's a whole bunch of parts of consciousness in the third subconscious layer. I'm talking billions of parts of consciousness. Our consciousness is so infinite and expansive, you cannot even fathom the amount of parts that we all have. So the third subconscious layer, with an infinite myriad of parts of our miraculous, wondrous self-essence, are first-handedly experiencing that activity in the unconscious body. All of the horrific sensations from the original trauma, even if there's suppressed fragments where the conscious self doesn't even know about this experience at all of those horrifying sensations are being first-handedly experienced by parts of consciousness in the third subconscious region. Okay? All of that, it's all being first-handedly experienced by them while the body is asleep in this example. And then the second subconscious layer is trying to protect the self from all that's happening, okay? So then in response to all of these horrors in the third subconscious layer, parts of self-essence in the second subconscious layer are experiencing automated defenses to all of that activity. In reference to the spectrum of traumatic response, which you can find out more about in my Implicit Revelations gift package, in relation to the spectrum of traumatic response, in this example, there's most likely to be a fold and or freeze stress response trapped in the third subconscious layer, and a fight and or flight stress response trapped in the second subconscious layer. So while parts of self-essence in the third layer are experiencing that fold response where they're stuck in the trauma, they're in the middle of reliving every sensation from being sexually molested, parts of self-essence in the second subconscious layer are experiencing the defensive response. I'm going to fight off this attacker. I'm going to run. I'm going to save these parts of consciousness from what's happening. So while parts of self-essence in the third layer are in the horrors of these projections, parts of self-essence in the second layer are experiencing the defensive responses. And that's where they're fighting off the attacker, and that's where the scratches came from on the face. The unconscious body was like, I'm fighting off this person, blah! But it was happening while they were asleep, and they ended up scratching their own face because it's all occurring unconsciously. Okay. And then the unconscious body mind with parts in the second subconscious layer say, I'm gonna fight off this attacker, I'm gonna run for it, and there's all this activity going on, and that's how the blankets and the pillows got thrown across the room. Okay. The scratches on my face, the room's torn about, and the traumatic response occurring in the body dysregulated the nervous system, so that's where you get the racing heart and being soaked in sweat. Okay. The conscious mind wakes up because of the intensity of all that's happening and notices the surface things, the scratches on the face, the racing heart, the soaking sweat, the room torn about with pillows and blankets tossed to the other side. But that's all that the conscious mind knows about. The conscious self doesn't know about all that other stuff that's happening. Okay. Other parts of self-essence beyond awareness are directly within those experiences, though. So this is one way that this activity might manifest. And again, this is one of infinite potentials. This may manifest in so many different unique ways based on individuals' trauma history and other elements of personal experience directly influencing styles of neurodevelopment. So there's a lot of variables here of how this may manifest, both through what's noticed on the surface of experience through the conscious mind and the details of what could be happening in the subconscious realms and the unconscious body. This is just one of infinite potentials of what may occur as the unconscious body is struggling to survive traumatic memory fragments because of sexual trauma during early childhood, while the brain and the body continue developing and parts of consciousness are directly within these experiences beyond direct perception and awareness of the conscious mind. Another example of how this process might manifest is through unique styles of sexual fantasies. And this might happen completely unconsciously, where it's happening while the body is sleeping and the conscious self doesn't know about it at all, or only knows a little bit about some of it because of certain clues, but doesn't have access to all that's happening. Or it may occur through dissociative daydreaming, such as with maladaptive daydreaming disorder, where the brain and the body kind of go into a low energy brainwave state, and it's kind of like you're in a state of being sleepy, but you're not asleep. And there's kind of these automatic occurrences. They're like daydreams, but you don't really have total control over them. So it's kind of like you're dreaming, but you're awake in it. Almost like lucid dreaming, but it's kind of its own unique thing because it's dissociative, and the brain and the body are basically in a state of sleeping, but the self is not asleep. And then there's these unconscious dreams that are happening, but the self is conscious within them. So it's kind of its own unique sort of dissociative experience that occurs. So this may happen in different ways. Okay, so this example, there may be unique styles of sexual fantasies that occur. The self within experience is in the early stages of puberty, in that point of sexual maturation. So it's just a natural part of the experience of growing up to kind of have some unique thoughts about sexual stuff, right? And so there might not be much thought about it because it's just a part of the experience. While on the surface, these unique styles of sexual fantasies may seem pleasurable due to how parts of self-essence are miraculously experiencing automated interpretations through the second subconscious layer, what's actually happening is that pieces of details from the original traumatic experience are within the sexual fantasies, but the self might not know about it. There might be some awareness of it, but there also might not be. Okay. But what could happen is there's unique sexual fantasies that seem pleasurable due to how automated interpretations of reality are sculpting interpretations through the second subconscious layer. But what's actually happening is that details from the original trauma are within the sexual fantasies, and this interpretation of reality is a facade to protect the self from understanding what's actually happening, which is that parts of self-essence in the third subconscious layer are first-handedly reliving the sexual trauma. Okay, do you see what's happening here? So there's the conscious mind, right? And then there's the first subconscious layer that kind of has some awareness about what's happening. And the second subconscious layer is experiencing these sexual fantasies, and they seem very pleasurable within the mind and the body. Okay, but that's like the first half of what's happening here, and that's just what's known about. The other half of what's happening here is that deeper within the unconscious body-mind, there are parts of self-essence directly reliving the trauma, and having sexual fantasies that feel pleasurable is protecting the self from knowing the truth about the horrors deeper within. The unconscious body is going through the same thing. There's activations of memory fragments from being sexually molested. And it's creating all kinds of unique neurobiological activity and unique styles of projections, because memories are how we navigate our experience and our sense of self. So as these memories are activated, they're projecting interpretations of current realities and potential realities, because memories provide navigation unconsciously. And so as this activity occurs, the unconscious body is experiencing these activations of trauma memory fragments, which may or may not be known about. Again, it could be a suppressed trauma that's not known about at all, or it could be traumas that are known about and they're memory fragments, or however they're filed away. There's infinite potentials for how this may occur within the vast complexities of our miraculous unconscious body-mind. The unconscious body is going through that, and then parts of self-essence are experiencing all of those horrific and terrifying and painful. It could be physically painful. It could be mentally painful. It could be emotionally painful. There's so many different horrors being experienced by parts in the third subconscious layer. But then the miraculous evolutionary adaptation interprets this and stimulates unique sexual fantasies so that other parts of self-essence can have a pleasurable experience, and that's what's known about through interpretations of the conscious mind. So that's another unique way that this unconscious body-mind activity could manifest. And then all you know about, or all the conscious self knows about in this example, is the unique sexual fantasies, which seems like a pretty normal thing to experience during adolescence. Okay, so it's kind of like a cover-up. It's kind of like a super mystical cover-up, and the unconscious body-mind's like, look, there's pleasure, nothing to see here, nothing's wrong here. Nope, this is a normal adolescence. Check it out, you're just being a teenager. But there's a lot more that's actually happening deeper within, affecting a whole bunch of parts of consciousness or aspects of self-essence. It's a miraculous facade where the unconscious body can go through the same stuff it's going through as it survives this traumatic stress and traumatic memory fragments, but then the subconscious realms miraculously adapt and evolutionarily expand to protect the self in whatever way that it possibly can within these experiences. Then, after all of this has happened, then the hypersexualized tendencies start to neurobiologically develop. And the hypersexualized tendencies might manifest immediately, or they might manifest later on down the road. It could actually take years for them to manifest physically, externally, in a directly perceivable fashion. But preceding all of that was all of this other stuff, where the unconscious body was reliving traumas, projecting that reality into the third subconscious layer, and then there were miraculous evolutionary adaptations on the second subconscious layer to protect the self from those horrors by interpreting the reality in a way that could help the self cope and survive and potentially even find ways to thrive through it. And the conscious self only had access to a minuscule fraction of all of that was happening. And then from that foundation, as the neurobiological development was impacted by early life sexual trauma, then these neurobiological states of engagement stemming from activity in the second subconscious layer, then they develop the hypersexualized tendencies, okay? So if there's parts of consciousness who have been experiencing, let's say for this one example, sexual fantasies with elements of the original trauma kind of knitted into the sexual fantasies, if they've been experiencing that subconscious reality and those automated projections for years, every day for years, thousands of experiences of being in this state of a sexual fantasy, but it's actually just a facade to cover up for the fact that the body's reliving the sexual trauma. If these parts of self-essence have been within those experiences thousands of times, it's going to impact the way they experience automated styles of neurobiological activity. And that is where the hypersexualized tendencies develop and become experienced. The self doesn't choose that route of experience, doesn't choose that route of self-perception or behavior or however it might manifest. Infinite potentials for this topic. The self never chooses that. The self is within the experience as the brain and the body miraculously, evolutionarily adapt to survive what's actually happening. So if these parts of consciousness have been within these hypersexualized fantasies that are actually projections of reliving being sexually molested, they've been within these very sexualized states thousands of times, and they're maybe 12, 13 years old at this point. Then the body and the brain develop on top of that information and stimulate certain styles of navigation and regulation, impacting all elements of personal experience. And then there are hypersexualized tendencies that may manifest in an infinite myriad of ways, might manifest immediately, might take years to appear within personal experience, etc. But that only ever comes after this other stuff. So it's important we understand these hidden subconscious realities to effectively understand what is being experienced and why, so that consciousness has complete power and divine authority to navigate any and all elements of personal experience for the effective health of the being, whatever that might look like for each unique individual. From these experiences during early puberty, then the neurobiological social engagement system continues developing, and then this individual, even in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or later in life, might experience unique styles of hypersexualized tendencies. Hypersexualized tendencies might manifest in an infinite myriad of ways, and there may be very subtle ways that they manifest, just affecting internal styles of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, or they might manifest in very obvious outer realities where they affect all elements of personal experience and lifestyle. It might affect seemingly small elements of experience, such as preferences of movies, music, and clothing style. Or it could affect greater expanses of personal experience, impacting all elements of decision-making, resulting in different styles of sexualized self-expressions or sexual encounters with other people, etc. It might be subtle and small and only affecting inner realities hidden covertly and in the backdrop, or it could manifest in bigger ways where it affects all the different elements of personal lifestyle and the way everyday choices are made. At the core of those experiences during adulthood are the underlying causality stemming from childhood, as that young teenager was experiencing the development of a state of consciousness with hypersexualized tendencies to protect an even younger state of consciousness from the unconscious implicit projections of suppressed childhood trauma. Understanding these hidden subconscious realities expands power and potential to transform elements of experience over here, because just directly looking at these experiences will not allow for understanding of where those experiences actually stem from. And only when you trace things back to their core can healing, transformation, and loving liberation truly become possible. Another helpful and important insight on this topic is that hypersexualized tendencies might develop unconsciously as a way for the unconscious body-mind to reclaim a sense of personal power. The sense of personal power was profoundly lost and stolen during the original sexual trauma. When that occurred, personal power was slurped away, and there was this sense from within of a loss of power, but it happened unconsciously. The conscious self may or may not be aware that the unconscious body-mind has these portions of it where it feels like it doesn't have a sense of personal power, and it wants to reclaim that. Okay, again, this is all happening unconsciously. None of it is through conscious choice or conscious thought or conscious logic or conscious decision. It's all happening in the unconscious body-mind through automated and complex neurobiological processes. Okay, so during the original trauma, power was lost. The unconscious body-mind wants to have a sense of power from within, and developing hypersexualized tendencies might be a way to reclaim a sense of personal empowerment. The hypersexualized tendencies are just the clue about what's happening deeper from within, okay? So looking at the different layers of consciousness, referring to thesis statement number 22 here in my Implicit Revelations case study, if aspects of consciousness in the third subconscious region are suffering because of projections from the original trauma happening in the unconscious body, then parts of self-essence experiencing life through the second subconscious region, who experience automated styles of protecting the self, might experience neurobiological processes that develop in a way that they reclaim power within a sexualized sense of self. The details of these subconscious processes and the manifestations of them within personal experience are infinite. But I want to share a couple examples just to provide some insight. There might be certain styles of dressing and self-presentation that are inclined towards a sexualized style of self or a sexualized manner of self-expression. The unconscious body-mind might feel safe and secure within its power by presenting the self as being a sexual being. So there might be a certain style of clothing or attire or heavy makeup or whatever it might be. It could be an infinite myriad of potentials here. But if the self-presentation externally, physically, the way the body likes to present itself, such as different styles of clothing, etc., there's a sexual inclination to that. The unconscious body-mind might feel a sense of empowerment. By being a sexual being by choice, there's a sense of personal power reclamation. So consciously, there might just be a sense of, I feel really confident when I wear this kind of clothes. Deeper within the unconscious body-mind, the second subconscious layer is protecting the self by reclaiming power and authority within the topic of sex and sexuality and sexualization, however you want to describe it, to protect the other aspects of consciousness. By carrying a sense of sensuality within self-presentation, this state of neurobiological engagement that's creating a unique style of personal experience for aspects of consciousness might feel a sense of personal empowerment. Rather than being afraid of the topic of sexuality or sensuality, this state of neurobiological engagement embraces it to have a sense of personal power reclamation. All of this occurs unconsciously. The processes determining these elements of neurobiological wiring that project automated styles of navigation and regulation, all of that happens unconsciously. But then the conscious self might have first-handed experiences impacted by that unconscious processes, such as feeling a sensual sense of self projected through elements of self-presentation. Another example is through sexual encounters, whether that's with the self or with other people. If there's a sense of dominance and power within these sexual processes physically, then there can be a sense of personal power reclamation within the unconscious processes of implicit trauma fragment memory projections. So deeper in the unconscious body-mind, parts of self-essence are experiencing the repeated activation of losing power. There's all these memory fragments that are being constantly activated, maybe in every moment of every day, maybe every night while sleeping, maybe sporadically throughout the week, but it's this constant thing that's occurring within the unconscious body-mind. And it could be impacting this individual in their experience and their neurodevelopment for many, many years. If the trauma occurred at age 4, 5, 6, and these fragments are being continually activated and projected projections, then by the time the individual is 15, 16, 17, they've been living in these traumatic projections for a decade, constantly experiencing them whether they know about it or not. So deeper in the unconscious body-mind, aspects of self-essence are first-handedly experiencing this constant reliving of losing power related to the topic of sex. Then, aspects of consciousness who experience the protection of the self through automated neural processes in the second subconscious region are feeling a sense of personal power reclamation as they dominate elements of sexual encounters, whether that's with the self or with other people. It might manifest in an infinite myriad of ways, but in these physical external experiences, there's a sense of personal power reclamation in the unconscious body-mind. And the individual may or may not know about that. It might be completely evident and known that this process here is a way to feel power reclamation because of that. Or there might be no knowledge of it at all. And there's all kinds of sexual impulses and sexual tendencies, and they're acted on and they're lived out externally, but the individual might have no awareness of what's happening. They might not even know that there ever was a sexual trauma. They might have zero awareness that there are parts of consciousness experiencing sexual projections from trauma. There might be nothing known at all. And so there might be manifestations of this as an individual experiences automated styles of action patterns from procedural memory data, the most unconscious type of memory within our miraculous brain and body, and they result in different styles of sexual encounters where the individual is holding a sense of dominance. And that might be a way to reclaim power through automated neurobiological activity. The conscious self isn't like, okay, I'm going to reclaim power by doing this. That's not what's happening. It's happening through automated neurobiological processes, and then the individual is experiencing that because the procedural memory data is projecting impulses and action patterns based on the brain-body wiring that has its roots in traumatic events during early childhood and early neurodevelopment, where trauma affected the way the brain and the body were developing, disrupted attachment development, etc. So these choices and tendencies and experiences externally might be a way for the unconscious body-mind to feel a sense of personal power reclamation because of all of this activity occurring beyond awareness, where traumatic stress elements within neurobiological wiring are being activated and projected and creating unpleasant experiences for aspects of self-essence beyond awareness, where traumatic stress elements within the neurobiology are constantly impacting personal experience beyond direct perception and immediate awareness. Hypersexualized tendencies might develop as a result of the unconscious body-mind striving to automatically, unconsciously, instinctively reclaim its personal power or a sense of empowerment from within. While some regions of neural wiring hold elements from the original traumatic event, then these other regions of neural data hold different styles of emotions and action patterns within implicit memories that stimulate a sexualized state of experience to feel a sense of empowerment within this topic or this subject matter. And so then this state of neurobiological engagement feels empowered in the realm of sensuality and sexuality. And that brings homeostasis to the unconscious body-mind. So this topic and this element of experience has a sense of power from within rather than this loss of power that's stuck over here in this other neural data. And this And this especially manifests within unique orders or unique order of wiring within the neurobiological social engagement system. So some states of consciousness would then be connected with elements of that original trauma. They might even be age-regressive child states of consciousness, the aspects of self who were in that experience back during childhood. And then there's other states of consciousness who would then experience the hypersexualized tendencies. And they are experiencing a state of neurobiological activity that has developed to protect the self from the original trauma. Rather than this state engaging and there being all this dysregulation and all this terror in the body, this state can engage, and then there's all of this regulation and this sense of pleasure and confidence. It's a miraculous evolutionary adaptation of the neurobiological social engagement system to optimally survive and thrive despite horrific childhood trauma. Every time sexualized tendencies are acted upon, then, as implicit procedural memory data is stimulating automatic unconscious information and projecting them into realities of consciousness, then the unconscious body-mind is experiencing power being reclaimed. But again, all of this is unconscious. The activation of these impulses is unconscious. The storage of the impulses are unconscious. And the way that acting on them helps other elements of neurobiological activity and the aspects of self-essence within those experiences beyond awareness, all of it is occurring unconsciously. The conscious self might just know about the impulse and the feeling resulting from acting on the impulse. But there won't necessarily be direct awareness about all of this other complex neurobiological activity occurring beyond awareness to impact experiences of consciousness. This, of course, may manifest in an infinite myriad of ways, from sexual fantasies or daydreams to sexual acts or expressions. But the hypersexualized tendencies could be a result of the unconscious body-mind reclaiming its sense of power. But the tendencies are only a surface clue of what's actually occurring deeper within the neurobiological structures. And so it's easy to look at something superficial and cast judgment on it, but that's a very powerless place to be. We don't ever need to judge ourselves or any other person for anything ever. We never know what people are going through beyond the surface. We often don't even know what we are going through beneath the surface. Because while an individual might experience thoughts, feelings, sensations, impulses, urges, and action patterns regarding hypersexualized tendencies or behaviors, there may be many aspects of their consciousness who are reliving sexual trauma, and this is the coping mechanism for that. Think about the profound power and the depth of that hidden reality. While there's a surface level of a state of consciousness who is projecting a certain style of personhood, other aspects of self are in horrific sensations, and this state of consciousness being present is providing survival for the being as a whole. Okay. Understanding these hidden realities of hypersexualized tendencies profoundly expands the space that we hold for these aspects of consciousness. Consciousness is never defined by experience, and every part of consciousness is worthy of unconditional love. There is always a reason that we go through what we go through. When we're having a certain style of automated thoughts, feelings, action patterns, etc., that's coming from a space in our neurobiological structures that developed for a reason. There's no mistakes in this miracle. There are no mistakes in the miracle of your being. It's not possible. Every part of you is exactly how every part of you is for a specific reason. And the reason comes back to love. But it might not feel like love. Because when love adapts to survive the unsurvivable, it can create experiences that don't feel like love. But love is always the intention of our brain, the intention of our body, and the intention of our consciousness. So in this one example, one of infinite examples I want to add, there's infinite potentials for the particulars of how this may unfold as neurodevelopment progresses and manifests certain styles of experience in relation to what has already occurred, including trauma that may or may not be known about. Again, it could be suppressed trauma that is not discovered until decades later. Infinite potential, but in this one example, I just want to come back to this. How loving is it of a state of being in this brain-body system where consciousness is flowing through to say, you know what? I'm going to develop in a way that helps these horrors feel okay. I'm going to develop in a way that helps things feel okay. I'm going to develop in a way that helps things feel good. I'm going to develop in a way that helps things feel pleasurable instead of painful. I'm going to develop in a way that helps life feel enjoyable instead of horrific. And so there may be hypersexualized tendencies because every time those are activated, it's a rebuttal to the horror occurring unconsciously. Because if there can be sexual pleasure here in the outer world, then the sexual horrors in the inner world will be reduced or put on pause or overlaid, kind of like they cancel each other out kind of a thing. Like the horrors won't be horrific if there's this pleasure to bring balance to what's occurring within. And so there could be this intention or subtension, a subconscious intention, where it's not consciously. The conscious self is not saying, all right, I think I'm just going to be a super sexual human being and we're just going to roll with that. That's not how this works. It's occurring in here, deeper in our unconsciousness than our conscious mind can fathom. Okay, so let's take a moment. You're sitting here, you're in your observational awareness, your conscious mind. Okay, we'll play a little game to kind of bring light to the depth of the unconsciousness that's occurring. Can you place a finger on your pineal gland? Can you? Can you place a finger on your nose? Can you place a finger on your elbow? Can you place a finger on your heart? Not where your heart is, but your actual physical heart. Can you do that? No? I can't. That would be kind of cool, but I can't do that. I don't know if you can, but I can't go inside of my being and put a finger on my heart. It's not something I can do. There's these aspects of us that are unconscious. We can't directly get there. We can't close our eyes and be like, oh, I see my pineal gland. Whoa, look at it in there doing its thing. But it's there. Our heartbeat is there. Our pineal gland is there. There's all this stuff inside of us. We can't get to it. We can't look at it. We can't touch it. We can't even describe it to ourselves unless we externally study it. But it's inside of us doing a whole bunch of things. Okay? That's how unconsciousness works within us. That's how aspects of our unconscious body mind operate. Okay? So when there's hypersexualized tendencies or behaviors, there's automated styles of Thoughts, feelings, somatic sensations, bodily sensations, action patterns, behaviors, automated styles of making decisions, different aspects of brain-body regulation, like feeling sexually turned on for no reason. All of that is occurring unconsciously. The conscious self is not choosing it or controlling it. It's coming from the neurobiological structures, okay? So there may be a subconscious intention of love. The conscious self is not choosing this, but deep within, all of this is occurring because of an underlying subconscious intention of love. Because these other aspects of self are experiencing unfathomable horrors of projections from sexual trauma. And then this other state of consciousness is developing, existing, and operating in a certain way that allows for sexuality to be fluidly expressed and explored. And so deep within the inner being, it's all about love. I love these aspects of myself and I don't want them to suffer. So I'm going to do what I have to do to be a warrior of consciousness and evolve in whatever way it takes. Whatever way it takes. I will do whatever it takes to be there for these parts of myself because they do not deserve to suffer. That's often what's happening in these hypersexualized states of consciousness, especially in uniqueorders or unique order of wiring within the neurobiological social engagement system. This style of conscious thought process is not actually occurring. I want to clarify. I love these aspects of myself and I don't want them to suffer, so I'm going to do what I have to do to be a warrior of consciousness and evolve in whatever way it takes. Whatever way it takes. I will do whatever it takes to be there for these parts of myself because they do not deserve to suffer. Everything that happens in the unconscious body-mind is automatic, instinctive, and occurring through complex neurobiological processes of implicit happenings like neural synapses. The unconscious body-mind has a completely different form of logic than our conscious mind does. When we think of logic, we think of these conscious processes and evaluating things and kind of making a decision and stuff, but that is not the same type of logic that the unconscious body-mind uses. The unconscious body-mind is experiencing trillions of happenings in nanoseconds. So there's a lot going on and it's happening really quickly. And it's all based on automated occurrences, the natural instinctive way that the brain and the body know how to do stuff based on the abstract blueprint of nature and the components that already exist and how those components instinctively know how to be alive, in combination with how experience has trained the brain and the body to know how to navigate its own self and life. So a collision of nature and nurture creates this foundation from which the brain-body system knows how to automatically do stuff, basically. And so the unconscious body-mind has a totally different process of logic and thought than what our conscious mind knows about. If, however, the unconscious body-mind could be perceived through a form of explicit dialogue, it might say something along the lines of, okay, I'm noticing that millions of self aspects are experiencing horrific projections from sexual trauma. What can I do about this using the tools in my toolbox? applying what I know from nature and nurture colliding to provide me with information about how to exist as myself, what can I do to help these aspects of me? What if I stimulate the generation of a state of consciousness that experiences these automated projections as pleasure instead of pain? This accomplishes a whole bunch of stuff. So even though I can't stop the neural activations from occurring, I can take care of everything, which is exactly what I'm here to do. Then the parts of consciousness who are experiencing the horrors of those projections will be protected as these other aspects of self experience pleasure. Simultaneously, the body will achieve homeostasis because there will be pleasurable forms of sexual arousal rather than dysregulation from a bunch of different types of traumatic stress responses. So, if the unconscious body-mind could talk, then it might say something like that. But what's actually happening is a whole bunch of complex neurobiological processes through implicit forms of communication. The way cells in our body talk to each other are very different from the way I'm talking to you right now. How the unconscious body-mind communicates within its miraculous being is completely different from the way that we communicate within ourselves through our thoughts and with each other through words and body expressions. And so our conceptualization of communication is explicit, but the unconscious body-mind speaks implicitly, through rapidly unfolding neural synapses and all kinds of complex implicit processes happening in nanoseconds, faster than our conscious mind can ever fathom or perceive. And it's all happening automatically, instinctively, beyond awareness, beyond control. And it's important to keep these hidden subconscious realities in mind so that we can effectively understand the miraculous being within and how this neurobiological miracle is impacting our personal experiences of consciousness. The hypersexualized tendencies are not the truth of who that aspect of self is, or the totality of what is occurring in the unconscious body-mind, and keeping this in our hearts as we create space for unconditional love, presence, and healing liberation provides opportunities for these states of consciousness to understand themselves in a way that liberates them. And that might look different for different people at different stages of their healing journey, but the key here is loving liberation. It's not about changing things. It's not about canceling things out. It's not about rewiring all this stuff. It's not about trying to be less or more of this or that. It's not any of that. The key focus here is clear and explicit. Loving liberation, whatever that looks like. Hypersexualized tendencies might arise as a clue of consciousness when the brain-body system is living with a unique order or unique order of wiring within the neurobiological social engagement system, especially stemming from childhood sexual trauma. Understanding the foundation of these neurobiological structures and how consciousness is experiencing them expands doors for loving liberation. Automated styles of thoughts, feelings, body sensations, etc. are aspects of our neurobiology or our brain-body system. Our consciousness exists and operates independently of our brain-body system, though, and helping to free our parts of consciousness from the automations they experience and identify with creates space for unity from within.